Hi, this is Lisa Hallett, and I'm with Wear Blue Run to Remember, and we are kicking off today our speaker series. So we have an awesome partnership with UCAN, and together we're going to take 4 sessions and explore some of the questions and opportunities that athletes in our community have been wondering about. While I love running, I am definitely not an expert, so I'm really excited to bring to the table 2 friends and incredible athletes and coaches to today's conversation. And I want to introduce Pete Ray and Gary Brimmer, who will be joining in tonight's conversation to discuss how to get started in this running industry. Both are accomplished athletes and coaches, but I'd love for them to do a better job and introduce themselves. Pete?
Hello, everyone. My name's Pete Ray, and speaking to you from a little mountain town, Blowing Rock, North Carolina. I've been a full-time coach for a group of professional athletes, the ZAP Endurance Pro team here in North Carolina for the last 20 years. And before that, coached club in high school and college. And I've been a lifelong runner. I started running as a little kid with my mom. And then ran in high school, and I ran collegiately for the University of Connecticut, and then ran for a Nike club called Nike South after I was in college, before I got into coaching. And that's pretty much my background. Gary?
I'm Gary Brimmer. I'm currently in San Antonio, Texas. I am the head high school track and cross country coach at 2 private schools, an all boys school at Central Catholic High School, and an all girls school at Providence Catholic School. I kind of got my running like a lot of people in high school. After high school, I actually joined the military, spent 22 years in the Army, ran for the Army, was actually an all-Army coach, was on a couple world military cross-country teams and some all-Army track teams and some marathon teams, and retired about 15 years ago and started a coaching service, and started off with some individual high school boys and girls and also some adults. And that culminated in me kind of getting a group settled here in San Antonio, Texas, along with multiple athletes across the country. And for example, I actually had 6 women at the Olympic trials this past March. Not bad for someone who's funded with 0 money. So yeah, I just love giving back to the sport at this point in my life. Old and slow, and so we just make other people faster now.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for your service, especially this week, which is Veterans Day. And thank you for your service. And for everybody who's watching, we have less than 1% of our country who's serving in our country, and less than 7% who have ever served. It is worthy of our honor and remembrance. So we are grateful for your choice to serve our country. This series is presented by Wear Blue Run to Remember and UCAN. And Wear Blue Run to Remember is a national community that honors the service and sacrifice of the American military. And UCAN is nutrition that delivers steady, long-lasting energy without the spike and crash. We're excited to both fuel this conversation and our pursuits out there on the road with UCAN. So we're going to take this conversation tonight, and it really is geared toward the beginner athlete. And we're going to break it into 3 sections. We're going to talk about training, nutrition, and gear. And I'd love to just start off the conversation with what I hear quite often. Like, really, Wear Blue Run to Remember is a community made up of athletes of all abilities. We've had women who've won the Nike Women's Marathon, and we also have that brand new athlete. And so, Gary and Pete, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you say to the person who says, I'm not an athlete? And then fill in the blank, right? I'm too old, I'm too out of shape, I'm too busy. What's your response to that person who says, I'm not an athlete?
Go ahead, Pete, I'll let you start.
Okay. We here at ZAP, we put on summer camps for runners, much like your folks, Lisa, of all ages and abilities. We've had campers who were 17, and we've had an 87-year-old camper in the last 20 years. And we're getting more and more of the beginning runners, the people who are either returning to sport after years away, or they're just getting started. And our sport is, what I like to tell people is, there's no sport that's more simplistic than running. I mean, it's what we were made to do, is move our legs. So whether if you're the person who perhaps is starting your very first day by being able to only run 45 seconds or a minute and a half and taking some walking breaks, or whether you're the person who's trying to qualify for your first Boston Marathon, it's inherent in what we do as human beings is we're made to move. So I would tell everyone, especially the folks that we're speaking to today, the beginners, the best way to get started is just to get yourself out the door. And I guess we're going to talk a little bit today about how to do it the right way, because there's definitely some wrong ways to do it also. Gary?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, I think a lot of times your newer runners, they tend to they tend to see everyone as very, very fast or much faster than them or at a level that's unattainable. And nothing could be further from the truth. I think, you know, I think I made probably my biggest impact on that new runner. At one point here in San Antonio, I had a Tuesday and Thursday night group, and I would have 40, 50, you know, athletes showing up, and the majority of them by far would be a newer runner, someone, you know, trying to get around the track one time without walking. And, you know, it's just easy to set attainable goals, you know, get through that first initial fear, and embrace this sport.
Yeah, I think that's great. And every time we get out the door, just like you're saying, whether it's one time around the track, one time around the block, or one time around your town, you're setting a new baseline for what you're able to accomplish. And I think that's what's so exciting about that beginner athlete, is that every day, every workout is a chance to stretch yourself a little bit further and set a new boundary. Oh, that's great. Okay, so we've gotten past that hesitation, that naysayer in our heads. We've decided to get out there and we're going to become a runner. Where do you start? Do we Google training plan and jump into that marathon training? Do you just start jogging around the block? Pete, what does that look like for you when you're guiding new athletes?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I actually had a local guy just recently, a father to one of our child's friends, say, "Hey, I want to get going." And if I'm being honest about Tim, his name's Tim, slightly overweight, hadn't really worked out in a long time, and first and foremost, I actually asked him, I said, "Hey, I do think it's important," you know, he's a middle-aged guy. I said, "I think it's important that you do have the thumbs up from your doctor that you're okay to start exercising. That is important." But once he cleared that hurdle, we started with some pretty simple stuff, which was, hey, we're going to start by talking about just good relaxed breathing, what mechanics look like for running and how you can be comfortable in running. And we're actually going to start by jogging quite slowly. This may seem odd, but one of the biggest mistakes I see in newer runners is they think, well, you know, I need to go out the door and I need to crush and run as hard as I can. Most beginning runners actually tend to start off too quickly. That's been my experience. And so I encourage Tim to do what I'll tell your folks. Start by running easily, truly conversation pace, you know, the point at which you probably could walk as fast. And plan breaks in. So with Tim, he was jogging for 45 seconds to a minute, and then he was walking for a couple minutes. And then we jogged for another 45 seconds to a minute, and then we walked for a couple minutes. And those first few runs, that first couple weeks actually, we were doing sets of anywhere from 6 to 8 of those, of 45 seconds to a minute of jog with a couple of minutes of walk. So the whole workout might have been 15 to 16 minutes total, including the walking. And believe me, he was fairly sore those first few weeks. And that recedes, your body adapts. But to answer your question, we started with easy conversation pace running. He would talk to me while he ran, and we walked in between. That's how we started.
That's so great. And I think too, it's important, right? 15 to 16 minutes is where you're starting. But what you did, right, you created a new habit. And once you have a really healthy, safe habit, you have something that you can build off of. And I think it's a great reminder, because you look at some of those fast runners out there and you think, I'll go as far and fast as I can, and that will be my workout. But to really start being a little bit strategic straight from the beginning, I think really sets our new athletes up for longevity in the sport. Thanks.
Yeah,
Steve.
and one of the mantras that we use, at least with the newer runners I've worked with, I'd be curious to hear from Gary, is I always tell them, finish knowing that you could do quite a bit more, so that you're not you're not beat up. I know that that's contrary to the American way, that you should push as hard as you possibly can all the time, but finish your sessions knowing, hey, today I jogged for 20 minutes. If I had to go 30, I could.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nate. What about you, Gary?
Again, I'm kind of the same way with newer runners. And I have a young lady that I've been working with since August. And it's really easy to think that you have to go faster than what your body's ready to go. And everyone wants to start doing speed work, or everyone wants to train for a marathon. And what I preach to my beginner runners is, let's make a very easy goal of, within the first 2 or 3 months, we're trying to get 30 minutes of easy conversation pace activity. Now, it could be walk, jog for 30 minutes. It could be, a lot of, walking or running, jogging, and then, take a break and, for water or what have you. But, it's something that you have to, that I like to impart of just something that's attainable. And sometimes it takes a while to get to those 30 minutes. And sometimes it's not that hard for that athlete to get to those 30 minutes. And the other thing is not to compare yourself to even let's say you came in with a friend, and, both of you want to start running together. One of you may actually, adapt. And I think that's a big term that it applies to our sport so well, is how do you adapt to the stressors that we're throwing at you. Some people adapt quicker for whatever reason, and will improve at a quicker pace. But you worry about what you can do individually, and just be consistent and create a routine.
Yeah, that's great. Routine is so important. And Gary, what I love that you use there is the word athlete. And I think it's so important to highlight and identify that as soon as we make the commitment to purposeful movement, being intentional with our health, we transition from being a non-athlete into becoming an athlete. And being an athlete doesn't mean you're winning a race. It means you're making a commitment to health and constant physical improvement. So I love that you identify this range of participants in the sport of running as athletes, because it is so true. Okay, we're running. We've made some healthy habits, right? We're working towards that 30 minutes. We might be using the run walk method. Let's talk about stretching. Are we getting out there cold and just warming up? And I think there's been so many different cycles of what the message is around stretching. What's the word that's out on the streets today? Are we jumping into the stretch? Are we doing dynamic warm-ups? And what do those even mean? Gary, you want to start us off today?
Yeah, I've seen the pendulum, and I'm sure Pete has as well, swing left, right, stop in the middle, back to the left again. I think, every coach kind of has his or her pet routine that they like their athletes to do, and I'm no different than everyone else. I'm a big fan of Mike Smith and Jay Johnson, some coaches that are within the profession. I do some dynamic. I start with a lunge matrix and some dynamic stretches before, or dynamic movements before. I'm a huge proponent of stretching afterwards, and slowly letting the body warm up by movement and activity rather than cold stretching. And that can be, some old school thinking about cold stretching, but that's just what works for me. It works for my folks, from whatever, ability level they have. And that's what my high school kids do, my marathoners do, and my new runners as well.
Great. So you said lunge matrix and dynamic warm-up, and I already feel like an elite athlete using those terms. But if you were to simplify that for a beginner athlete, what are 2 moves out of a lunge matrix or dynamic warm-up that you would invite a beginner athlete or a beginner runner to engage in before they began their run?
Forward, back, and side lunges and leg swings.
Oh, simple.
Simple.
That's great.
Maybe some standing. It's called a hurdle mobility drill, where it's basically just you're kind of mimicking the hurdle trail leg. But if you just had to pick two, I'd go lunges and leg swings.
Great. I can remember lunges all the ways and then leg swings. That's great. My coach tells me to do leg swings too. Pete, what about you?
Well, Gary and I agree on this subject. He's 100% right. Stretching is one of those, if you can believe this, a somewhat controversial topic in the world of running. But there is very little, almost no evidence that shows that static stretching cold has any direct effect on reduced likelihood of injury or on performance. And this is, unlike, I grew up in the 70s and 80s where everybody did, remember the whole like bouncing, stretching when you were cold, that whole thing. So much like Gary's folks, we always jog right out the door. We jog a very, very slow, almost at walking pace, about 3 or 4 minutes. And then we come back to our cars, now warmer, and we do what Gary's folks do. Now that we're a little warm, we will do some very light calf raises, which is a simple one that all your folks could do, just to open up your plantar, your soleus, your Achilles, your calves, and we do some leg swings and light lunges. So we jog a little, we do a little stretching, then we go out for our run. So make sure that you're warm before you do any movement.
Okay, that was helpful. And what I like, it's simple, right? It is not an elaborate jazzercise routine that we are doing before we go for our runs. Lunges, calf raises, leg swings, pretty consistent, but making sure we're moving into this, our body's fluid, a little warmed up before we're doing those types of moves. Let's talk just for a minute. I know we're going to dive into nutrition and gear, but especially right now, we are wearing so many hats. And what do you say as coaches, or how do you guide through? I always feel like my coach is helping my physical performance, but also my mental performance, right? There's such a dynamic. But what are you guiding on this exercise life balance? Our kids are at home, we're juggling our jobs, and we're trying to get our workouts in. How are you coaching an overwhelmed athlete generation?
I'll start on this one. When I interview a potential client, a new athlete, one of the things that I pride myself in is I write individual programs. I can have 10 athletes on the track or on the field doing a workout at the same time, but especially for my adults, and more so for my adults, they may be doing several different workouts at the same time. And that's just based upon their ability in race and all this stuff. But one of the things that I tell them in the interview is I base my schedule for them, my program for them, based upon current fitness, current goals, and life. And I think life is key here, because life gets in the way. Unless they're a professional athlete and that's all they do, this is it should be a priority, but where they place the priority of this activity is individual. And so life's going to get in the way. If you're a mom, and I have moms, and I have dads, and I have single moms and single dads, there are going to be days when you're supposed to do a workout and something's going to come up and it's not going to happen. And so we prioritize, family first, and then you kind of go into this activity, which you have to figure out individually where you're going to prioritize that. And I stress that it needs to be a priority for health reasons and mental reasons and everything. But life gets in the way, and so sometimes you just have to be able to be flexible and adjust, and as I like to say, slide the workout left or right on the calendar if you have to, or skip it and move on to the next day.
Yeah, that's great, right? Fitness in a lot of ways, right? It's a healthy lifestyle, but it's a de-stressor. So if it transitions to that point where it's become a stressor, it's absolutely time to reevaluate and rearrange that schedule to make it work for the demands of real life. What about you, Pete? You're working with a unique population. You've got some elite athletes where it really is their job to get out there and work out. But it's 2020 is a unique year in what all of us are juggling.
Yeah, and I do want to echo what Gary just said. He hit the nail on the head. Like, the willingness to say, hey, it's okay. We had maybe a longer run or a hill repeat session or something planned for today, and you had a sick kid at home, or maybe you had to, for work, get your second COVID test of the week. Whatever it is. Letting yourself off the hook is important. And so many distance runners are type A people who like to check every box, that often runners are the types of people who don't like to let themselves off the hook. So what I was going to say is, actually, it might sound odd, but whether it's the beginning runner we work with here at ZAP or the full-time pros who actually live here at our center, I actually encourage everyone to set goals. And the sports psychologist we work with talks about two types of goals. He talks about outcome goals that we all know about. I want to run this far. I want to run this fast. I want to qualify for this race, whatever it is. But process goals are the goals that we have control over for the most part. I'm going to take my iron supplement every day. I'm going to drink 75 ounces of fluid today. I'm going to make sure that I get 8 hours of sleep at least 5 times this week. Those are the process goals. And often as athletes, we don't place priorities on the process goals, because if you do those outcome goals, hey, I want to break 30 minutes for this 5K race this weekend. The outcome goals are more likely to happen if you take care of the process goals. So we write down goals, and they're not just outcome goals.
Oh, that's great. It's so important to contextualize what we're working toward. I mean, right? We do that professionally. We should do it for our physical goals as well. I like that. Well, that leads into nutrition, right? You mentioned this iron supplement, and I think a lot of new athletes, not even just new athletes, all athletes really struggle with this nutrition game. We see a lot of advertisements out there, chugging different beverages, eating different food. How much water do we drink, or when do we drink water? Where do you even start with nutrition?
Yeah, I can maybe just kick that off and then go to Gary with folks with his clients. But nutrition has so many different aspects, but there are a few that we really emphasize hard with our full-time pros here, as well as the clients we work with around the country. And the first may seem a little odd, which is, the classic American diet is, we wake up, we hardly eat anything in the morning, and then we eat lunch, and then at dinner we pack in 90% of our calories between 6 and 7 o'clock at night. It's so common because we're busy. We're just trying to eat when we can, right? And more research is now emerging that shows that frequency of eating is also very important. So your body releases a stress hormone called cortisol if you take long windows between caloric intake. So one of the things we really encourage folks is to try to minimize cortisol release in the bloodstream, which can break down lean muscle mass and bone tissue, by eating more frequently. So let's say, your diet, if you're a typical 50-year-old man who's maybe you're running 10 or 15 miles a week, which is sort of moderate amount of mileage, and you're exercising regularly. So if you're looking at probably getting in somewhere between 2,000 and 2,400 calories a day, should you take all of that in between 6 and 7 o'clock at night? Absolutely not. You should try to spread those calories out. It is important that you actually get up and eat a little something before you run in the morning, which a lot of people don't do. Something easily digestible with a low glycemic index, like a UCAN bar. And then, when you finish your run, make sure that you eat something relatively soon after you conclude your exercise. It actually helps with recovery. So eating frequently as well as you can, you're far better off eating 4 or 5 little meals throughout the day than 2 giant ones. So that's the one I'll kick off with, and I'll let Gary jump on that and see what he thinks.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that that I continue to try to learn and develop as a coach, and I've actually learned that in the last few years as well, that it's the frequency of meals. Probably the only thing that I am a big fan of, I don't like a lot of processed processed sugars and carbs. I like, we always, a good, a buzzword is clean carbs. when my athletes ask me, what should I do for nutrition? And I use the word nutrition because I hate the word diet. Um, um, I tell them, eat good, real foods. If you get your food if you can get your food delivered through your car window, it's probably not the best thing for you. So we do a lot of, we suggest and recommend a lot of, real whole foods. But we eat. I don't tell my folks to avoid, food. Definitely not restrict calories. But the other thing is, being here in Texas, it's warm a lot. And my athletes, all my athletes at all levels, we do half your body weight in ounces of fluid daily to start with, and then depending upon where you're at in the workout cycle or what have you, there's even more. And so we're big on nutrition and big on hydration. I think those are hydration is overlooked. I don't think people hydrate nearly enough, and they think they're getting enough, and they're not. And it's that, again, at all levels, whether it's my beginner runners, my high school athletes, even my marathoners that have qualified for the Olympic trials. And you start telling them to track the amount of water that water and hydration they're doing, they're severely lacking. So but yeah, it's just being smart with your nutrition.
So you mentioned let's go back a little bit. You mentioned half your fluid body weight. What are we doing with our body weight and our fluids and our water?
Okay, so I'm one of the reasons why I'm huge on and I push hydration. I make chronic kidney stones. I pass a kidney stone about once or twice a month. Fortunately for me, it's not really painful. I'm kind of strange, but so I was pushed. My nephrologist really pushed me into hydration. And the formula he had me use, it's great for endurance athletes, is you take half your body weight. So I'm 160 pounds. So you go 80 is half my body weight, and that's how many ounces I need to start off with, and putting in making sure I'm getting at least 80 ounces of fluid every day. That's the start point for us. I actually, you saw earlier before we started the recording, I'm drinking out of a gallon jug of water. That my goal is to put at least that gallon down every day.
Okay.
And Lisa, if I can add one thing to that, and I'm sure Gary deals with this more in Texas than here in the mountains of North Carolina, but that, again, more and more emerging research for our Center for Sport is that almost none of your fluids, if you're an active athlete, electrolytes are a good thing. So in terms of, the athletes who live here at our center who are drinking, fluid throughout the day, they've always got some UCAN electrolyte inside the water. It's sort of that old cliche that, oh, well, things like salt, it's always a terrible thing. Well, it's really not. If you're an active athlete, as your folks are, you lose salt, you lose electrolytes, and those need to come back. And by and large, it shouldn't just be water that you're drinking. It's okay to make sure that you have some electrolytes in your fluids as well.
Absolutely. That was a hard lesson I learned when I competed in the Ironman World Championships. I was so worried about getting my water in, I forgot my electrolytes, and I really felt a difference, one in how I felt and how I performed. But all those pieces come together, and if you're flushing your body with half your weight in ounces of water, you got to make sure you're replacing your electrolytes in that process. That's a great highlight. What about when I'm actually out there working out? So we've talked about, right, we're warming up, we're moving into our lunges and our leg swings, and we're getting to the point where we're really starting a build pattern in our fitness. What should I be bringing with me on those runs? Whether it's that 15-minute first run, should I have a hydration pack on? Or as they start getting longer and longer, what does nutrition look like while we're moving intentionally in our run workouts?
So, I think I really think that our sport overemphasizes taking nutrition during the run, and I do think the newer athlete tends to gravitate towards sugary products, sugary electrolyte drinks, either before, during, or after, because they're bombarded with commercials that's what we're supposed to do and that it's so great for you. I've always felt that, all of my athletes, I really highly emphasize the use of the UCAN Superstarch. even for easy recovery runs, even for those 30 to 45-minute runs. I am okay with my athletes drinking a serving of UCAN before, but just like they would if they were going to take it out in the long run. I Two things again. I'll stress the sugary sports drinks and gels, and then also I think there's still a misconception that you only need to worry about nutrition during the long run. I think every run needs to have a nutrition focus on it, and whether it's the long run or an easy run or a hard workout. And I don't have any problem with athletes, using my newer athletes using a hydration pack or anything, but I just recommend a lot of times for my athletes to plan their runs around water stops. Again, with where we're at now with COVID, a lot of those water stops have been shut down. And so more and more I'm seeing my athletes, either hand carry a bottle with them, just so they have something, or planning the out and back route coming back to their course. But nutrition, hydration, there's a plan for every run to do that. It's just it's an individual choice as to how they're going to do that.
Great. Thanks, Gary. What about you, Pete?
I would echo what Gary was saying, maybe to give just some general specifics. Obviously, the weather plays a little role. If you're in San Antonio and it's July, even on shorter runs, you're probably going to have some sort of fluid that you're taking in mid-run here, and we're up above 4,000 feet. Our summers don't largely get above 75 degrees, which may sound surprising in North Carolina. We're in a very unique spot in North Carolina, but really, really losing a lot of fluid, even in summertime here. If you're out for a shorter run or walk run, I say shorter, I mean maybe 25 to 30 minutes-ish, most people aren't taking fluid, nor do they need to, as long as they're well hydrated for shorter runs like that. But anything that's longer, 35, 45 minutes, we're most folks here, and I recommend taking some fluid even mid-run. Maybe you have a bottle of an electrolyte replacement beverage that you leave on the brick wall that you run by a couple times. But I also agree with what Gary said, like having a good, easily digestible calories pre-run without the sugar. It's so huge without the sugar. That's why we love UCAN. But the gels, all these sugary beverages that people love, right? The sheer amount of sugar in something like Gatorade, often people get these weird hypoglycemic spikes. We've all had them, where you have something with a lot of sugar in it, and then you go out for a run and you feel sort of lightheaded. It's because of the sugar. And if you can have something with a lower glycemic index that's easily digestible pre-run, that's going to help you immensely. And then, as I mentioned before, have something in your bag. Maybe you're at a park, you finish the run, and then have something ready to go in your bag to help you recover, even if it's something like a piece of fruit. Post-run.
That's important, right? How we're going to do the next day on our workout depends on how we recover on this day's workout.
Right, because most people finish their run and they wait 2 hours before they eat anything, and you'll feel like just complete a sack of crap, sorry. If you wait that long before you eat anything, eat something right away. Even some people don't like to eat right after they exercise, but you'll feel much, much better the next day.
Yeah, I believe it. I've lived it, right? I think we all have. But that brings up an interesting question. Stomachs. I think one of runners' favorite topics are their stomachs and all the different ways our stomachs feel on a run. And I do not have a cast iron stomach. So something I've really struggled with is, what are the right things to avoid distress while you're running? Any professional insight here?
I've only had a handful of athletes who've had, I guess say chronic bad tummies. And almost all of them had to do with eating or drinking the wrong thing before the run. And almost always it comes back to sugar. Almost always. Too much sugar in the gut is going to increase the your chances of having some GI distress. Again, that's so I'm such a huge fan of UCAN, is that it's so easy on the stomach. It just works well with my athletes, with whether beginner athletes, high school athletes, marathoners. Every time someone's had GI issues, they're, whether it's too much sugar. Of course, you got the high school boys that decide here in Texas the big thing is bean and cheese tacos for breakfast, and they'll eat a bean and cheese taco for breakfast and pay for it. But other than that, it always, to me, and maybe Pete sees something different for him, but it comes back to the sugary stuff.
Pete, if you don't have, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, and actually, it's a very apropos question, Lisa, because in a few weeks, one of your guests is going to be one of our athletes, Pardon Glovu, who was a 2016 Zimbabwe Olympian in the marathon, and he lives and trains here in Blowing Rock, and he actually has had lots and lots of issues related to gastrointestinal distress, particularly in his longer runs of 14 or 15 miles or longer, just time after time after time. And it wasn't until he started using UCAN, like Gary said, that his, I'm not gonna mislead anyone. He's still a guy who struggles with a little bit of gastro stress in the longest of runs. For him, these are runs over 20 miles. But the only thing that's given him any relief has been the Superstarch and the UCAN. And again, I have no research to prove this, but I believe a lot of it is because in terms of the content of sugar, is virtually non-existent, and the non-GMO starch really helps as well.
Great. One last nutrition question. And when I started running, this is my favorite part about the sport. It's the carb load the night before, right? Plates of pasta. I live for that stuff. And I think, what's the truth? Can I still keep eating my plates of pasta before my long runs? Don't disappoint me in this answer here.
I'm not a fan of carb loading the night before. On a real quick, easy, black and white sketch how we do it for my marathoners, and really we only do my marathoners. Everybody else, we eat a good solid nutrition, the same stuff you would have eaten all week long, whether lead into your training runs. We do a little bit of carb depletion. We carb load up until about a day and a half. I think it's, if I remember right, I think it's 36 hours before we stop carb loading, and then we just eat normal.
Okay.
And the athlete has his or her favorite comfort meals that have worked for them, and that's what they use. One of a UCAN athlete, Anita Pettis, has a certain Subway sandwich that she loves to eat the night before her run. She eats bread, and she eats cheese, and she eats meat. But carb loading, Pete can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not a big fan of carb loading. It just sits in your stomach, and the next morning you wake up and you feel a little bloated, and I'm just not a fan. I'm just not a fan. Not that it's wrong. I'm personally not a fan.
My take on it is what Gary alluded to briefly, which is our general advice regarding your night before the run meal is, with exceptions, if I saw that you were doing something sort of outrageous, is change nothing, which is if you're and seeing athletes from around the world, because we travel to a lot of marathons like Tokyo Marathon and London Marathon, Berlin Marathon last fall. Different cultures are fascinating. I was at the Berlin Marathon last year, and I saw two of the best German athletes the night before eating brats, Nuremberg brats, these big sausages. And I'm thinking to myself, sausage the night before an elite marathon? What are these guys? These guys are crazy. But their German coach told me this is what they eat the night before their longest workouts. That's what they're going to have the night before the marathon. So what you're comfortable with, stick with that.
Great. That's great. No, thank you. Well, what about shoes? Let's move a little bit into gear. And there's so many shoes out there. I mean, I grew up running in Payless shoes, right? We're going to find whatever the sale item is, But as I've gotten older, I'm so particularly, where does a new runner start in even knowing which is the right shoe to put on their foot?
I I can start this one if you don't mind, Gary. Dr. Brian Fulham is a podiatrist from Florida, and he runs a practice called Elite Sports Podiatry, and he's the guy we send all of the athletes here to if they have any feet issues. And he's a research guy, so he loves the research. And this might surprise many of your listeners, but the overwhelming body of research now on footwear and running footwear is that you are most likely to stay healthy. There's, people often think, well, I'm a larger runner, so I need a stability shoe, or I'm a smaller runner, so I need a lightweight, flexible shoe. Comfort is the number one indicator of your likelihood to remain injury-free, more than any other, not the style of shoe, not the necessarily one brand or the other, not necessarily whether it's a stability shoe or a motion control shoe or a neutral shoe, but is it comfortable on your foot? And when I would tell your folks, go to a store where they know what they're talking about. Not that you can't find someone at Dick's Sporting Goods who knows what they're talking about, but I would recommend they go to a specialty running store like a Fleet Feet or something like that, and have them try on a variety of shoes and have them select the one that feels the best. I don't know about Gary.
I completely agree. I like my athletes being in the least amount of controlling shoe that they need. Now, some people do need a little bit of guidance. They need some stability, some pronation control. But pronation isn't overall a horrible thing. That's the body's way of adapting to what their foot is, and they will create a little bit of natural cushion on themselves. I don't like my athletes being in big lunking cushion or motion control shoes. I like the foot kind of being able to do its own movement as naturally as possible as you can get in a pair of shoes. I'm not a minimalist by no means. I think there's benefits to all kinds of different. We can get into heel drop. There's benefits to lower drop and higher drop and all this. I will say the majority of people, in my opinion, don't need to spend more money to adding an over-the-counter orthotic / insert to their running shoes. The shoe companies put in some good research and development in those shoes, so that footbed within that shoe is going to do what it's supposed to do to your foot. Invest your money in a good pair of shoes, but as Pete said, go to your local specialty retail store. They're for the most part are pretty darn good at what they do. They're going to fit you in the right pair of shoes, and invest in a good pair of running shoes. And it doesn't matter what the brand is. Some brands work well for others, for some people, and other brands work for others. And you just gotta go with what works best for you and what's comfortable on your foot, so that you're, number one, not distracted by foot discomfort, being healthy, and then enjoying the run more.
And if athletes have the financial means to do so, Lisa, I would recommend, if they can, to actually have a couple pair that they actually go back and forth, because if you do a run, if you're on your feet for an hour on the pavement, actually the midsole will compress just a hair, and going to your alternative pair back and forth, you'll get greater life out of your shoes. And it can be the same model you have two pair of, or it can be maybe one's a little bit lighter and more flexible, and have a couple pair in your arsenal.
That's a great tip. So my takeaways from when I'm thinking about shoes, right? Comfort matters. I'm least likely to become injured if I'm wearing a comfortable pair of shoes, and it's going to look different for each of us. 2, I'm going to rotate my shoes, but also don't buy the hype, right? I'm going to get my shoes from a specialty running store, get some guidance there, and just find what works for me. That's great. And what about all the other stuff? What I love about, there's so many things I love about running, but a big piece is the accessibility of it. I put on my shoes and I go out the door. But we're seeing an emerging industry around all of the things that we need for running. Are there any other gear items that you really think are important for a runner to have in their arsenal, even a beginner runner?
Go ahead, Gary.
I'll start it off. You don't mind, Pete. Obviously, for female athletes, a good fitting sports bra is a must. It's going to keep you from chafing. That's an absolute must. And I coach predominantly female adults, and so that's something I hear all the time. Shorts have to be comfortable and well fitting. Socks are super important. All the other stuff, they're nice. You know, you can spend anywhere from $150 to $700 on a watch, and those watches will give you a whole bunch of useless data that you probably don't even know how to use. I know my left foot, right foot ground contact time, and can attribute to some percentage of being on my right side more than my left side to an injury that happened 17 years ago to my lower back. But how are you going to apply that? Buy again. If it's going to make you enjoy the sport more, buy it. If you want to go spend money on a GPS watch, do so. But take care of them. To me, the important things are short socks, a sports bra for the young ladies, and your shoes. Everything after that, that's if it's going to make you it's going to inspire you to get out the door. Again, get out the door, upload it, download it, and share it on your social media if that's what you want to do. I think it's a completely free choice, and I'm all for it.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. But what about you, Pete?
Just a couple of things. First of all, Gary, you mean I shouldn't know that my biorhythms are code purple today?
Right,
no.
right. How do we use that?
So what I would say, Lisa, is that I'm actually a big fan. I know we probably have a lot of your listeners in warm weather states, but for the days that it actually is chilly, we actually have a 50-degree rule with our pro team, which is if it's under 50, they have to start the run with pants on. So, and it's something in terms of injury, people who are running with bare legs when it's very cold out, you're more likely to strain something. So I'm a big fan of actually overdressing, even if it means that you run the first 10 minutes of a run, or you do your little warm-up routine that we talked about earlier with an extra long sleeve t-shirt on, and then you can always unlayer a little bit as the run goes along. If you're doing loops in a park or something, you can take something off and leave it on the bench to pick up at the end of the run. So I'm a big fan of having comfortable, loose-fitting running clothing, but doing so in such a manner that you're actually, even if you feel a little too warm at the very beginning of the run, you'll be well served. And then in regards to the quote-unquote gear, look, everybody these days has to know every last step, and did I run 3.2 or 3.25 miles? I'm an old schooler in the sense that I think the real reason that people are drawn to running is it's that simple childlike joy of the thing that we did when we were kids. So, hey, it's okay if you just say, I'm going to go out on that great trail in the woods and run that loop. And you know what? You don't have any idea how fast you ran the thing because you just enjoyed time in the woods without a GPS watch. So a little bit more natural, raw running without the data feedback is okay too.
I agree.
That's great. That's great.
And Pete, I love your 50-degree rule. And I'm sure you have a couple athletes like I do that start out a track session, and about halfway through the track session, there's pieces and articles of clothing about every 50, 60 meters all the way around the track because they're hot bodies and they just have to start peeling layers off. So the coach goes around, starts picking pieces of clothing up too.
You wear multiple hats as a coach, multiple hats. For me, I know having like a squirrel's nut butter or a body glide, something that I can put under places that are possibly chafing, is so important. And for me, I roll before I use a foam roller before and after I work out. And for me, it's been something that works. It's not a must have. And I think everybody has a different relationship with that, but those are my two go-tos.
Yeah. Foam rollers are awesome.
Yep. I agree.
We've covered quite a bit, but you know the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. Pete, what is any advice, last minute thoughts, anything we're missing that you feel a beginner runner really should be adding to their knowledge arsenal?
I'm just going to, two quick things. One, I meant to mention this earlier, but as you're getting started, I recommend everyone has a partner. It's always nice when you can be held accountable. And if you know that you have to make, hey, Lisa, I'm going to meet you at 6 a.m. for that 20-minute run that we're going to do. It's a lot harder to bail on that run if you know that someone else is there at that park waiting for you. That'd be one piece of advice. And then also, no matter where you are, whether you feel like you're the worst shape of your entire life, or whether you're someone who's, 18 right out of high school and can run 10 miles tomorrow, just get out the door and have a plan. Have someone who can put something on paper for you, someone who maybe knows more than you do about running. Get some help in laying out a plan for you is an easier way to get started.
Yeah, Pete stole my thunder. That's exactly what I really was going to say. Do not be afraid to ask for help. It doesn't matter what your ability as an athlete who runs is. Having somebody who knows more than you, that can help guide you, and help you navigate all these different things that come with this sport. It's very, very helpful, and it can actually make the whole process itself very, very enjoyable.
That's great. Thank you. And We're a Blue Run Tree member offers 5K, 10K, half marathon, and full marathon training plans on our website. They're very basic, but it's a starting point, and you're going to want to twist it and make it fit right for you. But having a plan, making a commitment is all it takes, and you transition into an athlete. And I just think it is such an exciting journey. Pete and Gary, thank you so much for joining We're a Blue Run Tree member today and just helping us get started as athletes. I'm grateful for UCAN and their commitment to helping us educate our athletes.
Enjoyed it. Looking forward to the next few weeks as well.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
See you next week, Pete.
Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this. It was highly enjoyable, and it was great seeing Pete again.
Good to see you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary. Have a great day.